Welcome back to Speak Out, everybody. Today I have a friend on that I want to introduce you guys to. Her name is Amy Main. She has a story that completely knocked me off of my feet. It just kind of stopped me in my tracks, and I thought it was one that needs to be told. Amy, I am so honored to have you join today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, like I said, your story was one that really stopped me in my tracks. I was like, wow, this is impactful for so many reasons. And we'll kind of dive into that and share why it really stopped me in my tracks. But for everybody who might not know you yet, tell me a little bit about who you are today, what you do, and who Amy Main is.
So I'm a Christian and I've been married to my husband for over 10 years. We have three kiddos and I grew up in and out of the foster care system. So that kind of changes the way that I view things in life. I'm a content creator and I make content online about being a countercultural Christian, standing up for the things that feels like society and even the church like is uncomfortable talking about. And I really enjoy getting to encourage other people and stepping out in their faith and doing what Christ calls us to do. He's a big part of why I think the way that I do, and he's a big part of my story. So,
Okay, before we dive into anything so people can go find you, what is your social media handle so people can find you? I
yeah,
love your content.
it's thank you. It's Amy Main, Amyy Main, and it's that on all platforms. So on Facebook,
Main, right?
Main. Yep,
Yeah.
Amy
Yeah.
Main.
So,
Yep.
Amy and I met through a friend who works for Daily Wire, for anybody who is familiar with Daily
Yeah,
Wire. And Aaliyah, who works there, our friend, she was like, you have to meet Amy. You have to meet Amy. I think you would love her. And then, so I was like, I
that's
went and
funny.
followed you and kind of like stalked you after that and was like, oh, I do actually really like her.
Yeah,
So I love that connection. And then we got to meet in person in Washington, D.C. during the
right.
March for Life week,
Yeah,
which is super
yeah.
awesome. So when it comes to your story, like at the beginning of your story, I want to kind of rewind. I want people, this is what I want to dive into is kind of
hmm
how you were raised, what happened in your life, why your life is completely valuable still to this day, and kind of debunk a lot of these narratives that, foster kids are better off having been aborted and all of these things that we
Right.
hear all of the time. But talk to me, the beginning, you were raised by a single dad, right?
Right. Yeah. So whenever I have a biological older sister, and when I was 2 months old, my mom left for a pack of cigarettes and never came back. Which this was something that she'd done for. I have many other half siblings, so this is like a repeat for her to do this. But she left and left my dad, single dad, like overnight. Didn't know he was going to be a single dad. Didn't see it coming. And he really struggled to raise us. He struggled with alcohol and he was abusive. I mean, he was a pretty scary pretty scary guy. And our family was like a hit or a miss. Our biological family was a hit or a miss of whether they were around from what I can remember. And I he was abusive and we were homeless. And so we were living in and out of hotel rooms. We would sleep in the car. And as a kid, like I didn't realize that's not normal. I
Yeah.
so much so that like when it was like I actually remember it. It was around the time of 9/11. I was in kindergarten, and it was around that time because of 9/11. I think I remember it so well. But um, I would tell our school counselor, like, yeah, we live in a car. Like, I had no idea you were not supposed to say that. And so they opened up a case on us, and we were actually taken into foster care. I remember like being taken into the foster system from school, actually. And so, like as a kid, I knew my dad was, um, probably he struggled. I mean, like as an adult, I know now that he just struggled heavily. Being a single parent, first of all, is hard, like on its face, but then to also have a struggle with alcohol, you have two young girls, you're working a job, like it would just be incredibly stressful and everything. So I try to have some grace with it, not okaying it, but like as an adult, an extremely hard situation all around. And when I went into the foster care system, I was in the foster system for about 5 years. And during that time, I saw I saw some pretty sad and scary things, and then I experienced more abuse while in foster care, more sexual abuse, and um, it was pretty traumatic. It was pretty traumatic. And my sister and I, we were both fortunate to be adopted. I was adopted when I was 9. She was a little bit older than me, but we weren't adopted by the same parents. And her parents, they basically what they had said was that, we want to adopt her sister, but we don't want to adopt her. So I went on to another family. They adopted her. We were adopted separately. Um, and yeah, that was kind of my experience through the foster system initially. I was in it from 5 to 9, so a good chunk of time.
Do you remember what it was like when they said like you're not going home to your dad? I mean, do you have vivid memories of that or have you kind of blocked it out, you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah, actually, that is one of the most, I think one of the most impactful memories I have from being a kid. When I was a kid, I was always in and out of the office, either because my dad was really late to picking me up, or I had head lice, or who knows. I mean, it was the early 2000s, so like they knew what was going on, but like I just spent a lot of time up there, and I don't really
Yeah.
know too much about what the foster care system's like now, what it's like to take kids into the system, but I remember sitting in the office one day and it was parent teacher conference day. And I'm sitting and there's a woman that has like short brown hair and I'm like looking at her, she's checking somebody out. And I just remember having the thought of like, I want a mom like that because I always like, that's what I would think. Anytime I would see a woman that like had the same color hair as me or had, you know, pretty much anybody who was with their kids or whatever. Not a jealousy, but just like a yearning to have that because I didn't have a
Yeah.
mother figure in my life. The only ones that I did was like very toxic, like my dad's girlfriends and stuff. But um, then she turned to me, that woman that was checking out her kid, and it turned out she was a CPS worker, and she was actually there to take me into foster care. And I looked over, and there were cops that were on the front steps. And my parent teacher conference was right after school, and so I was like, no, my dad, like you don't have to take me. My dad's gonna come and get me. Like, um, he's just late. I'm like, yeah. I thought my brain still didn't comprehend why I was going to the foster system because I really thought it was just because I was being picked up late um, for a parent teacher conference. But I remember they did let me say goodbye to him, and he was giving me a hug, and there were two cops right there and this CPS worker, and he like whispered in my ear, "Don't tell them anything." And they were
Mm.
like, "Sir, we're standing right here," and that like led into a bunch of chaos afterwards. But fortunately, my sister and I, we were placed together initially for a while. And so it wasn't as scary because I had somebody at least that I knew and was familiar with. We lived together um, right up until we were adopted separately.
And so then was it wasn't the people that you were living with at the time who ended up adopting you then? That would have been just a foster family and not an adoptive family?
Yeah, so when we moved around quite a bit. Um, I don't remember how many homes I went into, but when we first went into care, um, I can't, it's like the first year or so is like a blur. Um, it's hard to kind of piece together the exact time frame, but I know we went to several different homes. And
Mm.
I'll get like flashback memories of like, I think I remember this person just periodically. So I've had that happen a lot. And so I know there were several different foster families. And like I said, we were in the foster system for 4 years. And so, yeah, yeah, 4 years. And in that time, I think about the last year of it, we didn't live together because we went to a house, the one that I experienced a lot of abuse at. And the dad was actually an alcoholic. The foster dad was an alcoholic and he was abusive to his kids. And
Oh my
it was just
gosh.
horrible. Yeah, it was not, it was well, I don't even know. I think I was so used to like a very angry father figure around that it didn't really scare me or faze me or anything. I just knew like don't mess around
Right.
basically. But um we lived together up until that home, and then when all of these things started coming out, they actually split us up. And My sister went to live with another family, and we were separated for probably a year, I would say, 6 months to a year. And then we came back together at a home right before we were set to be adopted because our the parents' rights had been terminated. And when we went into that home, um, we were together at that foster home for a little while, and it was a very steady, like good home. It was a Christian woman, single mom, but a very stable home environment. And then we went from that home into her adoptive parents' home. And I had a lot of issues because I'd never really had anybody around that was parenting me. Like I didn't
Yeah.
have a steady figure in my life to guide me, to discipline me, to teach me how to have emotional regulation. I had therapists, but I just really feel like the whole time that I was in therapy, I was just being like psychoanalyzed about everything. I wasn't really given tools. It was just kind of like, even to a certain extent, my behavior was just justified, so it was never addressed. Um, but whenever I went and moved into the home with my sister's family, I had a lot more behavioral issues than my sister did. And so I think that kind of just set the tone that, she's too hard. We don't want to adopt her. And so I moved, luckily, to the same city actually that I moved into another home where I was adopted when I was 9. And I went to the same school with my sister and everything, so I still saw her pretty regularly. But yeah, I was adopted at 9 and I was pretty much an only kid. I had an older adopted brother, but he'd already moved out and everything. So I moved into that, and that was like probably the first time that I saw any semblance of like structure or
Yeah.
any steady parenting.
And what were they like? Were they a good family, or because you don't get a say, right? At that age, it's just
Right.
you go where you're told, and if somebody wants to adopt you, like there's no say for the kids, if I'm
Yeah.
understanding.
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty accurate. I mean, not
Maybe
that I
when
would
they're
have said
older,
no.
but
Yeah, yeah, because I did experience it. A little bit further on in my story, I actually experienced it again. But they were good people. I do think that they loved the Lord, but I think that they were ill-equipped. And I don't mean that like disrespectfully or like it just it was structure and there was family structure, but I don't think that they had the type of structure that was required. I think they leaned heavily on the people that were psychoanalyzing me, and just like justifying certain behaviors. And there was really not a lot of discipline in the home. Like I was considered sheltered by my peers and stuff because I wasn't allowed to watch anything that had like drinking, smoking, cussing, sexual things. I wasn't allowed to watch any of that stuff. But as far as like if I had an emotional outburst or anything, there was never any consequences or redirection or any type of guidance when it came to that. And that's not to say that I blame them for those things or it's like, well, this is the way that I am. Like I take responsibility for myself, at a certain
sure. I,
point,
I imagine as a
but
parent, you're probably thinking if this child who's, obviously had plenty of trauma, every child who's been taken from their family has trauma,
right.
who's been in foster care, there is trauma there, and there's some sort of an outburst, maybe they struck, and I don't know them, I don't know exactly how they were, but I would think as an adult, you might struggle a little bit with how to handle those outbursts,
Hmm.
and how to be able to do it with grace and love and passion that doesn't trigger something else would be
Right.
my thought process.
Right. So as far as them not knowing how to handle trauma or like trauma victims, that's what I mean when I say like that they were ill-equipped. And it wasn't
Yeah.
that they weren't good parents, it wasn't that they weren't good people. It was just that when it came to responding and having the tools to help a kid that has literally like they haven't had a parent from the ground up and it's been spotty ever since. They've gone through an abuse or things that maybe you don't even know about because they haven't told you about it.
Right.
And then it's hard enough to raise a child regardless. Like there comes with trials, and then to introduce like literally all of these other variables is just made it incredibly difficult. But that being said, when you are a foster parent, not to not give grace, but you need to understand that because that allows you to be successful. So they didn't have that. And
Mhm.
so over a period of time, from the time I was 9 to the time I was 14, I struggled a lot with behavior, with managing my emotions. I would just have like a full-on meltdown because I didn't know how to emotionally respond or regulate myself. And
So before
um,
that though, were you like when you found out you were getting adopted, were you excited to like was it did
I
you
I guess I have no idea. I think it was just at that point there was no normalcy for me that I
yeah,
like the normal things that you expect or like I had been in foster care almost as long as I had not been in foster care. And so for
right.
me, completely normal, especially when I didn't remember when I was 1, 2, 3. Like I remember start having memories when I'm like 3.5, 4 years old. So as
Yeah.
long as I can really remember and recall, my normal has been not normal. And it's been this is like the first sense of like normalcy. I remember when I found out I wasn't going to be able to live with my sister, that was kind of hard. But again, like there was that year where we already didn't live together. And so, to me, it was normal. It was new, but it was the normal. Like, this is in my mind, I think I just kind of handled it like they were a new set of foster parents, but that I was going to be staying at permanently. And
Mhm.
so I wasn't not happy or anything. And I think I did love them and we had a good relationship. There was good memories and they definitely tried. And I mean, I got along with like, I felt welcomed. Um, I felt like loved and important. Um, but just as far as like the structure of parenting versus child, I don't think that it was ever really a normal structure.
Yeah. And so then 9 to 14 you start kind of acting out a little bit and
Right.
going through some sort of internal struggle that we're seeing in your everyday behavior.
Yeah. So from 9 to 14, I had a hard time not making friends or anything like that at school, but I was a big people pleaser. I think because growing up in and out of the foster care system, I learned to be what I needed to be basically to survive, like a survival instinct.
Right.
I'm going to tell you what you want to hear. I'm going to be who you want me to be. And so I kind of just chameleon myself. And it brought a lot of anxiety onto me, but it also put me in a position to like be one person at home and then during school I was a completely different person. So from age like 9 to 12, it was fine. Because I wasn't really going over to people's houses and sleeping over or anything like that. I just mainly had like my cousins that I was hanging out with. But right at about 11 or 12 is when I started going to other people's houses. And I didn't pick the best friends. I just picked the available friends. And so I had a lot of I was surrounded. I won't say like, oh, I had a lot of bad influences because I knew what I was doing. And it's hard to explain that to people that like I knew these kids were doing things we probably shouldn't be doing. And
Yeah.
and I could probably have been considered a bad influence just like they would have been, like I
Sure,
wasn't
sure.
a good kid either. So I started running around with kids that we were just getting in trouble, constantly getting in trouble at school. I was getting kicked off of the volleyball team because I was constantly in school suspension and just having a lot of behavior issues like in the classroom, messing around for attention, doing whatever was going to make my friends think that I was cool at whatever expense. And I started actually getting bullied by those same friends when I was in the seventh
Oh,
grade. I know, yeah. It's like it turned. Was it seventh grade, sixth grade? I think it was the seventh grade. Yeah, it was the seventh grade. That's right. And I started getting bullied. I actually told recently that I had my front tooth knocked out because I messed with like the ringleader.
what the heck?
Yes, I know. It was crazy. We also kind of the area that I lived in, it was kind of poor. Like we weren't really everybody was pretty much poor. And
Yeah.
especially everybody that I was hanging out with. We did not have money. We didn't come from money. So the things that we did for fun were just like to get in trouble. And
Right.
everybody and most of the people that I knew's life, like your parents went to jail or, whatever. It was just like the norm. And so whenever I was in the seventh grade, I got into it with like the ringleader of the friend group, and she came up behind me in a gym bathroom and pushed my face into the mirror, and it I turned around and spit my tooth into the trash can. It was like completely gone.
Oh, jeez.
Um, so yeah, I mean that's like yes, I have a yellow tooth, and it's because I always have to go in and get it fixed. But yeah, so I getting this is the type of people that I'm hanging around, like the type of people that are smashing people's teeth out.
Right.
And my parents, one summer I went to like a church camp and I had like this like awakening. I don't think it was a real awakening or anything, but I started hanging out with kids that were actually good kids, and I was like, I don't want to be around kids that are going to get me in trouble. I want to actually like try to live my life for Jesus, but really it was just kind of like I want to keep having this feeling that I was having at church camp, but like on a regular basis. And I
Yeah.
really wanted to go to the school that my friends went to, which was like one town over. And I knew if my parents would drive me, that they would let me switch schools. But my parents were like, well, that's fine. You can switch schools, but you're actually going to switch to this school, which wasn't the school that my friends were going to from church camp. And I went to this other school that was one town over. It was very small. Like my graduating class was like 23 people or something. It was
Oh, wow.
very, very small. And I got in with an even worse crowd. And at first it was fine because I had one friend and she was a really good influence. She's a really good kid and everything. But then I started hanging out with some other people, and then I started hanging out with some people that were much older than me, like high schoolers. And I started being introduced when I would go over to my friend's house for like to sleep over or whatever. My parents thought that they were sending their kid to another parent's house because they talked to that parent, and that parent's like, yeah, I'm going to be home all weekend. It's going to be fine. And this was like a single mom and stuff. She's just, but she seemed very like, we don't let this happen and we don't let this happen. My parents left, and it was like, do whatever you want. Like, you can do whatever you want.
Mm.
And buying me cigarettes and alcohol. And we were doing drugs. We were smoking marijuana. I mean, it was just like, it was complete opposite of what my parents thought that they were like sending me to. And my
Yeah.
friends were there. So I was like, heck yeah, I'm going to go. Like, I'm not going to tell them. So I became a very good liar. And within a 6 month period, um, I had completely like spiraled. And to the point to where I got into an altercation, actually. I got caught shoplifting and my parents had to come pick me up. And I got into a fight with my adopted mom at the time, and they're like, you know what, you're going to there was like a in a couple towns over from us, it was like a bigger metro area, and they had basically like an emergency behavioral intervention thing that you could take your
Yeah.
kids to. But they took me there, and they actually wouldn't take me because it's like, first of all, it's a lot of money to send your kids to one of those. And then second of all, if you want help, you have to go through the state. And so I actually ended up moving in with my friend whose mom let us do everything. And
Oh,
so I continued to go to school for probably another month or so. I was staying there. And um, my parents came to school one day. I guess they talked to the counselor or something, and I went to the counselor, and I was like, I don't know what it was. It has to have been a God moment because I don't know why I would have said, I don't want to do this. But something in me just like shut down one day, and I was like, I don't want to keep living like this. I knew like I, if I would have continued doing what I was doing, it wasn't going to be a recreational drug use. It was going to start to be an addiction. And
yeah.
I was going to end up in jail. Like there was no way all my friends were going to jail, and we'd already been accused of like being a part of people who robbed someone's house, but we actually weren't. But that doesn't matter when you're constantly in trouble with the police. And my parents, they had reached out to the court system. They opened up a family and needs services case, and then they got me into a rehab. And then when I went into that rehab, it was like a 2 month, maybe. Yeah, I think it was about 2 months worth of rehab that you were supposed to do. And it was an inpatient thing out in like the woods, middle of nowhere for youth. And it did not get better. Like I obviously wasn't around alcohol and drugs, but I was around a bunch of kids that were around, used to be being around that sort of thing.
Right.
And so it was just basically like taking from one bad situation into the next bad situation and then putting me in again unsupervised in more bad situations. And I got started getting bullied while I was there as well, and I didn't react to it well because I felt very trapped. I hated it. I was like starting to become depressed and I was fighting with them. And this whole time, I didn't realize that the counselors at this place were communicating with my adopted parents. And so they would come on the weekends or like once a month, every other weekend, something like that, to do like family day, where you would come and you would do like a big counseling session and you'd like come to support your kid that was struggling.
Hmm.
And so they didn't let me, like, they did not lead on that anything was wrong. They knew that I was getting um, bullied and stuff there, and that I was getting angry about it, and that we would get into fights where the girls would gang up on me, and then I would react to them, and everybody gets in trouble. But it's a zero tolerance. If you get into a fight, most kids are there by court order, so then you just go to jail. If you get kicked out of there, you just go to jail. And I was like one of the only ones that my parents elected to put me there and asked
Wow.
to have me put there. So when two of the girls got kicked out for bullying, for fighting, and they went to jail. And then I got pulled in one day, like 2 weeks later, and they said that I was also leaving the program. And so I'm like, I'm about to go to jail. Like that's where my brain's going, that I'm about to go have to be in the juvenile detention center. And that place is horrible. I've been in a tour of that where they're like basically trying to terrify you into
Yeah.
being a good kid again. um, but they said that the DHS would be there to pick me up that day, and that I'd be packing up my stuff. And I was like, "What do you mean DHS? Like I have parents. Like I have adopted parents. I don't need like DHS, because I knew what DHS was. I'd been
Yeah.
in it my
Yeah.
whole life." And they said that my parents actually had given me back to the state. I had been with them from 9 to 14, and they said that they couldn't do it anymore, and that it was too much work, and um, it was too much emotionally and stuff. And so
What did you
that
feel when they told you that?
I think at first I was just, for that day, like when the two workers were coming to get me, I was just kind of shell shocked, I think. I think I was like, it's fine. It's going to be like a little bit of this, and then I'm going to go back home. Like it's just going to be like it's like not like a mistake. I knew like they didn't make a mistake, but I'm just going to have to wait it out, and then I'll be good enough, and then I'll go back home. And it wasn't until I drove back to the county that I had grown up in and out of this DHS office, but I hadn't had to be there for 4 years.
Yeah.
And when I walked back in, it just like, I don't know if it was like memories had hit me or what, but like I was like, oh crap, I'm in foster care. Like, and so I lost my crap when I was there. I was like yelling, and because I walked in and I saw like all my stuff from my home. And I was like, oh, like they really did just do that. And I didn't have any of my stuff at the treatment facility. I just had like a suitcase. And so I think when I saw all my stuff packed up that day, I was like, they've had this plan for a long time. Like I could tell they did. And they were like, we found you a home, so you actually don't even have to go to the shelter. Because most of the time when you're a kid and you come back into foster care, you go to a shelter, and then you wait there for like a couple months until they can find a placement. But I actually had a place to go. At the time, like now as an adult looking back, I'm like, that was a godsend that I was a teenager who just came out of a drug rehabilitation center, who was just given back by her adopted parents. That was God giving me a reprieve. Like he protected me in that moment, but in the moment I flipped out. I mean, like I was like, I'm not going there. And I was like ticked, and I was like, let me call my parents. And I think they did actually let me call my parents, because I was like, they can tell me that they didn't, that I have to be here. Because I hadn't had to talk to them. Like I
Yeah.
hadn't gotten to talk to them for the whole time. I'm like, they're my mom and my dad. Like they're gonna this they can tell me that I have to go, but like I'll probably be able to convince them or something. And so when I talked to them on the phone, it was like they were told that I was gonna ask, and like that they went through the script of like what they had to tell me. And like I ended up just like, okay, well fine, I guess I'll go to this house. And I did end up going to one foster home, and I was emotionally rocked and just angry and ticked. And anytime something that hard happened, I just like lost, I just had like a meltdown. And they were trying to get me into therapy and everything, and it just didn't seem to be working. And so that foster family failed, and I did end up going into a shelter. And I stayed in the shelter for the summer. And when the summer it came to a close, they told me that I had a placement that I could go to. And the home that I had come into initially was kind of like a teenage fun house. It was such a weird, it was such a weird home. Like as an adult looking back, I'm like, that was weird. But there was still like not really a whole lot of structure. It was just everybody gets to do fun, and it was like good people again, but just not what I needed. But this family that I went into their home at the end of the summer, I I pull up to this house, and there's like this super young couple that comes out. It was like just the mom, and I'm like, who is that? I thought she was like a foster daughter or something. And she starts talking to my caseworker that's gonna do like the initial placement and everything. And it's the foster mom. And I was like,
Mm.
that's kind of weird. She's super young. She's like in her late 20s. And the foster dad came home, and he's even younger than her. But they had three kids in the home that were young. They also had another teenager in the home that was 16, 17, something like that, 16 or 17. And it was such a weird family dynamic. But I stayed there. They were very structured, very like they were young, but they had provided something that I had not had my entire life, which was structure and
Yeah.
discipline. And they were loving, but they were not pushovers. And if I had a meltdown, they let me feel the full weight of my choices. They did not shield me from them. And I remember one time I like got ticked off and like stormed upstairs, and I accidentally kicked over a paint can, and it fell on the wall and like went all the way down the stairs of the wall and like
Oh,
ruined this whole thing of pictures, and got in like the carpet and everything. And like I had to go back out there and help clean it up, and I was grounded like to my room for like a full day. And it wasn't like, okay, you've done your time and we feel bad for you after a couple hours. It was like, no, like I'm glad that you're sorry, you're still grounded. And
mm,
like just like things like that, where if they said that they were going to do something, then they did it. If they promised me something, they came through on their promise. Like their word meant everything. And there was a good family structure, like as far as like people were showing up and everything. And it wasn't perfect by any means. Like to this day, there's still some struggles, but overall, I had good, solid structure. And a couple months later, they asked me if I wanted to be adopted. And for me, like as a teenager, it's really hard to be adopted in the foster system. Very hard. Like you're gonna age out essentially. Like that's pretty much what your expectations are.
yeah.
And I actually had a foster worker tell me that and tell me like just mentally prepare yourself to be independent living. Like I was 15 years old, and they were preparing me to be independent living. That's how like little hope there was. But
Wow.
um my parents asked me if I wanted to be adopted again, and I was like, yeah. I didn't even think about it. I just said yes. And I was adopted that winter. When I had turned 15, I was adopted. And yeah, I mean, from then on, pretty much through for over the next 3.5 years, there was just lots of structure, lots of discipline. They shared Christ with me. Um, we moved out of that state, which was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me, which is just kind of be removed from constantly seeing what I saw when I was growing up, like areas that reminded me of certain places. And I just saw like there was a lot of great things that happened over that time. Like I said, it wasn't perfect, and people
Sure.
make mistakes, but overall, it was just like one of the best things that ever happened to me as far as like foster care.
Do you keep in touch with them as like, are they kind of people that you still keep in touch with, like as somebody would call their mom, I would call my mom or something.
Mhm.
Do you view them as people that are still pouring into your life and you're spending time with them?
Yeah, I have a really good relationship with my dad. Um, there's been, like I said, like I don't want to, I have a really good relationship with my dad, but
Yeah.
with my mom, there's been some things that have come up that um have really been a struggle for a lot of people in our family. My parents got divorced, so my parent they're when you're a kid and you're an older kid and you have young parents, a lot of people will say like, "Oh, it's so cool that your parents were so young when they adopted you," and and it was like I mean it was a godsend, and it was a gift from God that I was adopted again. And no matter how old you are, like God's going to equip you if you yield to Him to
Yeah.
help you to raise these kids and everything. But there are also downsides to it, um, and unfortunately, some of those downsides have impacted my relationship with my mom. And um, when my parents went through a divorce, so I got married when I was pretty young, and my parents got a divorce. It was probably 3 years ago now, and it was really, really rough. I have nine, or I'm one of nine,
Wow.
10 now because I have my dad married someone who had a son, but um, it was a really rough period of time, and I was it put uh, an unfortunate variable between me and my mom's relationship, which had looked very much like a friendship for a really long time and less like a parent-daughter.
Sure.
Um,
What about the family before that? Did they ever come back into your life? Did you ever have a conversation with them? Have you reached out to them since they said they couldn't do it anymore?
so that's kind of a weird dynamic. I have like talked to them a little bit. They've actually met all three of my kids. Um, but there was a moment in time whenever I was being when they were having to terminate their rights to me, and the judge made them get up and tell me to my face,
Wow.
and that they were gonna do that, and which I'm grateful for. It was horrible in the moment, but he was like, if you're gonna give your child back, you have to take responsibility in front of everybody, and so they did, and they looked at me on the stand and said like, we want to cut the cord. We think she's better off, the state can handle her.
Wow.
And so as an adult, knowing that that happened, and even furthermore, like as a parent, it was incredibly difficult to just act like it was fine. And through Christ, I want to extend forgiveness. And so in my heart, like I truly have forgiven them, truly, truly. And I care for them and I want the best for them. He has since passed away from cancer, but as far as like when I would be around them, then they would just like call themselves mom and dad, and like they tell my
Mm.
kid, like consider my kids grandkids and stuff, and I'm like, but you're not. And I don't mean that like offensively, but and I would never say that to their face, but just the relationship, the weight of it was on it, that was pulling on the relationship, and so we don't really talk very much. Just because it's also confusing for my kids too, because they're
Yeah.
like, I'm so confused. If they adopted you, and so to continuously try to explain that, and I do not blame my my first set of adopted parents. I don't blame everything on them. And I think that there is a certain amount of grace and understanding that needs to come with the mistakes that were made. And I was a kid, but I was also fully capable of making my own choices. And I chose to be around the kids that I did. I chose to be on, to dabble in the stuff that I dabbled in. Um, but also I wasn't protected. And so there's so many stacking elements to where I was 100% responsible for myself, but they were also 100% responsible for themselves as parents too. And
Yeah.
so it just creates a weird dichotomy. And so we don't really have a relationship much anymore.
Yeah. So you ended up getting married super young.
Yeah.
I know this. And so did you graduate high school and then go off to school, or like how did things kind of shake
Yeah.
out? You have your second set of adoptive parents and
Yeah.
things are going well.
Mhm.
And then how did you get to marriage, I guess, at that point?
Yeah. So I struggled with relationships with boys, men, whatever. I struggled with that because I had really low standards for
Yeah.
myself. And thank gosh, my parents, they did protect me in that. We did biblical courtship, so we dated with purpose, which is what I just encourage anybody. Don't just go around flippantly dating for selfish ambitions and desires and satisfaction. Like date with the other person in mind, essentially, and with a purpose and with a God-given purpose. And so my parents, we did biblical courtship where it was like we were more chaperoned. And I was not a virgin when I got married, but I wanted to have something like sacred. And so there was even a point where I was like, I'm not gonna kiss my anybody until they're my husband. So like on the altar, that will be our first kiss. And had very high standards for my relationships and if I was dating. And I had a courtship before I met my husband. I was 17 when I met this boy and we were courting, and it didn't end super awesome, but it ended as well as that relationship could have been. There was lots of just not good things, not good things involved with it. But my dad, he works for a big company and it had moved us up to Washington and it was about to move us back home. And so when we were on our way back home, we actually made a stop in Kansas and we were going to stay with my grandparents, my mom's parents who lived in Kansas. And while my dad moved ahead because my parents were going to build a house and that takes forever. So
Sure.
we stayed with them for convenience sake. My dad drove up on the weekends, and while we were there, we went to my grandparents' church, and that is where I met my husband. We went to a singles group, me and a friend that had moved actually from Washington back to Kansas, and I met my husband there, and we met in I want to say it was March is when we first met, March of 2014. Yeah. And we started courting in May, and then we got engaged in July, and then we got married in October. So
Wow.
it was very fast, but it was very much like, I'm not messing around because I'm not doing what I just did with courtship. I know I want to be married, and it wasn't like, let's take 5 years to figure out if we're soulmates or anything like that. It was just, I was working on my relationship with the Lord. He was working on his relationship with the Lord. And he was prepared because he's a little bit older than me. He was prepared for marriage. And we did, our first kiss was at the altar. We didn't kiss or anything. That was another reason why we had a very short courtship because
Yeah.
we were waiting. And that's also why I tell people too, like, do not settle if you're a woman or a man that's looking for marriage of being like, well, I'm just gonna have to lower my standards to what's available to me. It's like, don't do that. Of course, I didn't have to date when it was like the cesspool of dating that it is now with like all the
Yeah.
the online
It's
dating
rough
and
out
stuff.
there, I think.
It is. I feel for these young people because, ugh, and then society and culture has infiltrated it, and it just seems horrible.
Totally.
But go back to church, find somebody at church. But yeah, so we got married pretty quickly, and we celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary last October.
That's incredible. I mean, I just like, I feel like you just kept getting knocked down
Hmm.
over and over and over. Your story is like a consistent being knocked down, having to get back up again, being knocked down, having to get back
Hmm.
up again over and over. And then you meet your husband, and now you've had children and a beautiful marriage and a beautiful life, and just shows like God's goodness. And um, I don't know. Your story is so, so powerful to me, but it's also one of those stories that you hear people say somebody is better off
Hmm.
aborted than being in foster care. You know, the
Right,
things that are going to happen to them, they're going to be abused, or this is going to happen. It's
right.
all of these awful things that are said. Um, so your story, I guess, in a sense, it's like you've been through hell and back. You
Hmm.
came out on the other side, and it's kind of this shining star of like, no, we're not
Right,
better off aborted. I am just as valuable as
right,
anybody else.
right,
So I'd love to hear your opinion on that. When people
right,
say that and use foster care as an excuse to push abortion, how does that make
right.
you feel?
You know, to me, I've heard that so often since being in the pro-life sphere that I'm like, yeah, here comes the argument again. In order to avoid suffering, we must kill you. That's what you're saying. Which is, it's this false sense of compassion that I don't think people realize they're saying. That's like, well, actually, it would be better to kill you, to just eliminate the possibility of suffering so that we ensure you don't suffer. But they don't want to
Right.
also acknowledge that you're eliminating the possibility of hope. So you get to say your life isn't worth living because I personally wouldn't want to do it. And of course, everybody always uses children suffering as a way to push a false sense of compassion. They'll
Right.
say, they'll say, actually, I'm being compassionate because I don't want someone to suffer. But your means to the end is to actually eliminate the person. You're not acknowledging that. And so it's like saying, if I know that I'm going to die of cancer when I'm 50 after a horrific battle, well, I might as well kill you when you're 20. Because what's the difference?
Yeah.
It eliminating you early, okay, yeah, you just eliminated the suffering, but you just took away 20 years that I would have had. So had I been eliminated whenever I was in my mother's womb because they knew that she was going to leave me, okay, well, you eliminated the first 5 years of suffering where there was trauma. And then after that, where I made bad choices, even I guess you could even argue that yes, now you have taken away 15 years of suffering, but how much joy have I experienced outside of that suffering, right? What if you don't know that somebody is going to go into foster care, right? This
I
person's
think that's the
born,
biggest thing too, is we never actually know. No, none of us can predict
right,
the future in that way of saying this
right,
child for sure will go to foster care or won't go
yeah,
to foster care.
yep,
And it also doesn't address the issue that there is suffering in abortion. A
right,
lot of babies feel the pain through abortion. They're
hmm,
being dismembered, they're being suctioned out. Like that is suffering in and of itself.
yep,
So to me, it's both situations are suffering. You're not really eliminating it. You're just doing
no,
one that's final, and then
right,
there's suffering, and we all go through suffering. I wasn't
yep,
in foster care, but I've had situations through my life that were really difficult to get through, and I
right,
imagine most people do have some sort of suffering along the way, and you're essentially saying everybody's better off dead. If that's the argument, well then
yeah,
everybody's better off dead because we all have
that's right.
suffering.
That's right. And it's at the point where it's, you know, this same question that I get asked is, if God is good, why is there suffering? Right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing that you can apply that same logic to if a child's going to end up in foster care and they're going to be abused, they're going to be sexually abused, and they're going to carry this trauma. That's the type of suffering we don't want. Where's the line?
Mm.
Which suffering is where you say, okay, now you don't get to live? How bad is the suffering? Is it that they're going to fall and skin their knee? Is it that they might lose their foot? Is it that they might be bullied when they're in middle school? Is it that they might be physically harmed in a car accident? Where's the line of suffering? What
Right.
amount of suffering is the threshold that now you say you don't get to live? There, you don't, except when you frame it like that, it's no longer compassionate. And
Sure. Yeah.
but it doesn't matter because that's exactly what you're saying. So
No.
when it comes to that, I just immediately, my response is quit saying I care so much for foster kids that I'm going to kill them. That's what you're saying. So, which is probably not the very nice response, but we
But
should
it
not.
is. I mean,
It's the true
and that's
one.
something that I think I love about you so much is that you're not afraid to tell the truth unapologetically because a lot of people will skirt around things. There's like, oh, maybe I could say that better. And then sure, so there are sometimes we can say things a little bit softer, but the
Hmm.
truth is the truth. And
Yep.
if somebody chooses to be offended at the truth, I can't necessarily help that. What I
Right.
can tell them is the truth, and I can tell them that I love them, and I can tell them why they're wrong. And yes, abortion is killing a baby, whether it is by pill, chemicals, being dismembered, being suctioned out, a needle in the heart. We know that the different ways that that happens. I can tell you the truth. If you choose to be offended by how the babies are killed, that's not something I can necessarily control. But you're
Hmm.
so bold and unapologetic in your quest to tell the truth and through the world through a biblical lens. I think it's so beautiful because we don't see a lot of that
Mm.
today. We see a lot of people who are very scared of hurting somebody's feelings, and
Right.
they won't tell them the truth because they want them to feel good about themselves. But that's where we go wrong. And that's where
Hmm.
people choose abortion or think that it's compassionate to end the life of a child before, God forbid, allowing them to go through foster care.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I think the more uncomfortable you are, like the more offended you are by facts is, and the more uncomfortable it makes you, it doesn't mean what somebody is saying is more wrong. It just makes the situation more egregious. So you're
Yeah.
really, really offended at these facts because this is a really, really evil thing we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so if it's not a big deal, people are going to be offended, but they're going to be like, that's not even worth my time. But
Well,
when you're on the wrong side of something this evil, that's what I think, in my opinion, I think that's why we see so much anger on the opposing side and so much to the point where they're not even saying that they're not okay with killing babies anymore because they're trying to desensitize even themselves to this egregious thing that's happening. And you're right, like you're offended. That doesn't change the facts. It also doesn't mean that what the person's saying is mean. It just means that you're offended.
yeah.
Sometimes your offense is completely isolated to you alone. And just
I would
there's,
also add, are you offended or are you convicted?
yes,
Because I think a lot of
exactly.
people feel convicted. I see this within the different subject, but like people will say, why are you shaming moms in this instance? And I'm like, I'm not shaming anybody. I'm sharing something that I believe is true. And to me, I'm like, I think you're just convicted and you don't
Right.
want to actually address that feeling within yourself. And so you're kind of having to like push back on the person who's saying it instead of actually
Yeah.
saying, wow, I need to think about this. Why do I
Hmm.
feel this way? Our baby's actually valuable enough
Right.
to be worthy of life and not the doom and gloom that abortion has for them. So I think there's offense and conviction. I think a lot of people get those mixed up.
Oh yeah.
And
So 100%.
but it's tough because you have to be able to speak truth, especially when it comes to a topic this serious and
Hmm.
this heavy, because it is a heavy topic. It is something that, I think it's 1 in 4 women has had an abortion at this point in time.
One,
So
oh yeah, that's a
they're
lot.
all around us. Yeah, yeah, it's all around us. And um, I guess we'll kind of close out, but I want to ask you because there's probably people who've been in foster care who are listening. Somebody may have
Right.
been in foster care, hearing that their life's not valuable. They're better off aborted, or maybe they're
Right.
in there right now. If you had to say something to them to encourage them and tell them that their life is valuable, how would you do that?
Right. Number one, those are lies straight from Satan. I know that some people are like, well, we need to argue this from like a state that everybody can understand. But at the end of the day, every single person is made in the image of God. Every single person is valuable. Even like not just the people that people admire. Those people are not more important. Not just the leaders of the church. Those people are not more important than people that are sitting in the pews. Not the people that hold the power or the intellect or the money or any of that. That is not what makes you valuable. What makes you valuable is that you're made in the image of God. And you deserve just as much hope, just as much love and care and attention as somebody who people already love and adore and attend to. There is no limiting your worth based off of the situations that you're sitting in. And but the other thing too is it doesn't matter who you are. There's always going to be somebody that comes along and says that your life is less valuable because you have less. It's like when
Yeah.
people say, "Well, I don't want to bring somebody into the world because they're not gonna, I'm not gonna be able to give them everything that they deserve and whatever." Nobody gets everything that they deserve. That's not what determines your worth. We live in a society that puts a lot of weight on what we have and what we can offer other people, but that's not what makes you valuable. What makes you valuable is your very existence. That's what makes the embryo sitting in the freezer right now that may not be thawed out and utilized or maybe even discarded just as important as somebody who has a $5 million company. They are intrinsically the same value. And we know that you're not on like a tiered system. And so every single person, especially those who are less able to either stick up for themselves, especially like if you've been in the foster system or you haven't been told that you're important, those people almost need more of the time to be told that you are important, that somebody is going to stand up for you. Because when
Yeah.
you can't do it for yourself, somebody needs to come alongside and do it for you. And then the second thing that I would say, the things that Satan uses to tear and to use to destroy can be some of the things that God will use to give you a strength in. Nobody ever says, I learned and grew in these easy times. You are actually at an advantage. And wouldn't say that it's a good thing what you're going through, but it does put you at an advantage. And so changing your mindset that I went through these things when I was really young, you're going to be prepared in life for things that somebody who lived a sheltered, nurtured life, which is still good. Like I pray my kids live that life when when they're young, but you now will have a strength that maybe somebody wouldn't have had. You're going to have to fight harder in these other areas to go and learn how to be dependent on your own, or maybe you don't have parents that are around all the time. Like there will be disadvantages simply because of your circumstances, but because of those disadvantages, there will be great strengths. So one of the things I say is I had as a kid, it can be quite sad, but I had to basically be appealing to parents so that they would want me. I had to learn how to read a room. I had an abusive father, and so I had to learn to listen to fluctuations. I had to know what someone was thinking. While that created a people-pleasing thing in me as a young adult and as a teenager, after growing out of that and realizing I'm a people pleaser, how can I grow from this? It created a really good strength that now I know what you're saying and I can know what you're thinking and I can articulate it. And it's now my job. That's literally what I do. And it allows me to connect to people because I have faced it head on, the struggles and the trials and the disadvantages. I have a big strength in that area in my relationships with people and my communication with people and my ability to see things from like an outside perspective. And so those things where you're like, well, because I am in the foster care system, it's created these triggers in me or these negative personality traits or whatever, those can actually be really good strengths. And so changing mindset to not throwing yourself a pity party. And I also don't go and tell everybody to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, but to change your mindset to not how is this going to affect me negatively, but how can this negative experience be turned into something positive?
Yeah, that's powerful. I am so like taken back by your story and so grateful for God's hand in your life that you are where you are today and that you've come out on the other side and are such a beautiful example for so many kids who have been through situations like you, who might not see any hope, who might not see any value in their life or any worth, or, you know, start believing those lies that, well, maybe I was better off aborted, or maybe I should consider, you know, ending my life. There are people like that every single day. And you are proof that the situations that you go through do not define you.
Right.
And they are not, they don't have to be the constant. And I'm so inspired by you as a friend. And I don't know if you could tell, but I was tearing up multiple times in your story. And I just am inspired, I guess, speechless and inspired. So I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for pouring into everybody that you do on your social channels now and kind of using your story for good. And your testimony is one that I think will rock a lot of people's worlds. And I mean that in a really good way.
Well, I really appreciate you saying that. And I hope that it always encourages me whenever people see that how far I've come, but ultimately Christ is a life giver and
Amen.
He is merciful and He is good, and there's always hope through Christ. And so I really appreciate you saying that, but that brings me great joy because it means that people are seeing Christ very prevalent in my story, and that's the most important thing.
Amen. Amy, thank you so much for joining the show. I appreciate it.